All right. I think we got everything all set up. So we'll start. Give folks a second to join in with us. Give this a second to make its way to Facebook. Perfect. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. And people will continue to stream in a little bit as I talk and give my brief introduction. Welcome, everyone. My name is Kelsey. I'm the events coordinator here at Tampa Bay Books, and I'm super thrilled to be here this evening with Greg Neri and Colette Bancroft to celebrate the launch of Polo Cowboy. We are super excited to be launching this book. It is the follow-up to Concrete Cowboy, or what was Ghetto Cowboy. The name kind of changed with the adaptation. Is that right, Greg?
Yes.
Okay. So the follow-up to this wonderful book, and so we're super excited to be launching it here this evening. And I'm just going to introduce our speakers, and then I'm going to turn it over for this wonderful conversation I am sure Colette and Greg have in store for us. So Greg Neri is the Coretta Scott King Honor-winning author of Yummy, The Last Days of a Southside Shorty, and Ghetto Cowboy, which was made into the Netflix movie Concrete Cowboy, starring Idris Elba. His books have been translated into multiple languages in over 25 countries, and they include True and Nail, Grand Theft Horse, Chess Rumble, and Hello, I'm Johnny Cash. In 2017, he was awarded the first of 2 National Science Foundation grants that sent him to Antarctica. And prior to becoming a writer, Neri was a filmmaker, an animator, illustrator, and a digital media producer, and one of the creators of the Truth Anti-Smoking campaign. He is currently co-chair of the Antarctic Artists and Writers Collective and writes full-time while living in Tampa, but not actually right now, with his wife and daughter. And then, of course, we have Colette Bancroft, who's going to be doing our interview this evening. Colette is has been the book editor at the Tampa Bay Times since 2007. In addition to writing reviews and interviewing authors, she directs the annual Tampa Bay Times Festival of Reading, which is coming up, I believe. And she served 2 terms on the board of the National Books Critics Circle. Bancroft earned degrees in English from the University of Florida, and she wishes she had finished her dissertation on the novels of Raymond Chandler. And so, Colette, it's always a pleasure to have you here. And Greg, thank you so much for being here this evening. Sure. I look forward to this conversation. So I'm going to turn it over to both of you.
Thanks, Kelsey. Well, Greg, it is good to see you. I haven't seen you. I'm not sure when the last time I saw you in person was. It's been a while.
I think it was at the last reading festival.
I think it might
and
have
we
been.
met at one of the parties.
Yeah. It was a couple of years ago, but I'll come back to this. But you've also done the reading festival virtually. I want to circle back to that. But first things first. Let's talk about Polo Cowboy. Your new book, which is launching today, is that right? Or yesterday?
Yeah, yesterday came out.
Yeah. They always publish on Tuesday. It would be a violation of the cosmic order if it came out on a Wednesday. Congratulations on the book, and it's a lot of fun and very interesting, as your books always are. And but this one is unusual for you because it's a sequel. You wrote Ghetto Cowboy, and I'm going to circle back to that too. 10 years ago, is that right?
Yeah.
Published about 10 years ago.
10 years ago.
And then those characters were in that book, but you didn't write about them again. You wrote about many other things, and then Ghetto Cowboy became a movie, a Netflix movie on, as Kelsey said, called Concrete Cowboy, and now we have a sequel. You brought back Cole and Harp and Boo, the horse. Have to mention the horse. And but Cole ends up doing something very different from what happened to him in the first book. So I wonder if you can talk about how this book came to be.
Yeah, it was definitely unintended. But what happened was, when it came out and I started, I usually travel around the country a lot. I do a lot of school visits. Right. And kids started asking, like, well, when are you going to do the next story? Mm-hmm. And I was kind of like, well, I kind of put everything into that book. I don't know what else I can write about with those characters. Yeah. But, it kept coming up and I kept thinking about it, but I really didn't know what to do. And And, you know, some schools would do kind of like fan fiction because the book ends on kind of a cliffhanger in the middle of a race and you don't know who wins. And so they would write their conclusion of who they thought won the race and all these things. And, you know, then I ran into kids who had ideas. You know, they always have ideas like, oh, I know what you should write about that. One kid in particular, his name is Chris, had an idea and thought I should do a book about this thing. And he started talking about polo, and particularly this barn in Philadelphia in Fairmount Park, which had the only African-American polo team. And it was a story I knew about before, but you know, the polo world and the cowboy world are really two separate universes and never do cross. So it really didn't have a place in Ghetto Cowboy. But it's an amazing story in and of itself, which you can read about in a book called Crossing the Line by Kareem Rosser, who was like the star of that team, and it's his memoir about a urban polo, all-black polo team that went from being the Bad News Bears to national champions, kind of thing. A really great story. But this book is not that. Right. But this particular kid was a urban cowboy, you know, like the kids in Ghetto Cowboy, and he kind of crossed over and discovered polo, and so he became both, kind of straddled both worlds, which is kind of interesting. And I started thinking about kind of like a West Side Story, or Romeo and Juliet, about Cole becoming interested in this girl who was a polo player. You know, it's like a cowboy and a polo player thing seemed like interesting dynamics, because we think about polo as kind of this posh white sport, you know. So that's where kind of the germs started, and then it took a different spin. And this was way before there was even any talk of a movie. So this is not a money grab to, you know, take advantage of the, you know, the eyes on the movie kind of thing.
I wondered about the timing of.
Yeah, this was way before. But it did take a spin when I went up and we were shooting the movie in Philadelphia a couple of years ago. And I visited a military academy that used to have a polo team there in Philadelphia. And I visited other military academies. And so that became part of the story, because, you know, the story picks up where the first book leaves off, and his mom has come to, it's come to pick him up to take him back to Detroit, where he's supposed to live with her, but he decides that he doesn't want to go back. He wants to stay in Philly, you know, and go to start high school there, which is kind of like an emotional bomb. And he hasn't even talked to Harper about it, his dad, who's not too happy to hear that. But his one stipulation is he has to get a job, even though he's only 14. He's got to kind of pay his way. So he gets him a job as basically as a stable hand for this military academy's polo team, where he's really the odd man out, because it's, you know, it's a military world. It's basically an all-white school. Yeah. Except for this one girl that he meets named Ruthie. So I thought maybe I could just read a little bit of that scene where they first meet.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, that's a great scene.
So that's Cole and that's Ruthie.
The illustrations, by the way, are wonderful.
Yeah, I'll show them off in a second, but so this is right after he's thinking about asking Harper. He hasn't gotten the guts yet to ask him if he can stay there. So he takes Boo out to Fairmount Park, which is where he does all his good thinking, and he comes across the old police barn, which is where Boo was imprisoned in the first book. But they now find it's totally abandoned and empty. So they're kind of looking at it thinking, because it has these nice corrals and everything, and he's imagining like, oh, wouldn't it be great if we could move in here? Yeah. So I'm sitting there dreaming what I could do with this place when I hear some kind of strange noise. Thwack, bang, thwack, bang, thwack, bang. What is that? I leave Boo at the trough and follow the sound out to the corral. It seems to be coming from the other side of the barn. The barn is big, so it takes me a few minutes to walk around its edges. Sound is getting louder and louder, and then when I come up on the corner, I start hearing a voice too, a girl's voice, counting. Thwack, bang, 22. Thwack, bang, 23. When I peek around the corner, I see the weirdest thing. A girl sitting on a sawhorse with a piece of cardboard for a saddle, holding the reins like it's a real horse or something. She's hitting red softballs with a long wood hammer. She takes a swing at one of them. Thwack! It sails through the air and hits a square chalked out on the side of the barn. Bang! 24, she counts. I have no idea what she's doing, but I watch her hit a few more. She's dressed funny too, wearing a helmet, and on her arms and knees is leather pads. On her feet, she's wearing long black boots that cover her calves, and she got on white pants and a dark shirt that says one word, chuckerhead. When she runs out of balls, she climbs down off of that thing and starts collecting the loose ones in a basket. And then she puts the basket at the foot of her horse and takes off her helmet. Oh, dang. She about my age, but her face, it looks like she's made up for Halloween or something. Her skin is dark like mine, but around her eyes, nose, and mouth is painted like white. Like she just dipped the front of her head into a bowl of paint or something. It's not polite to stare, she says suddenly. I look around and realize she's talking to me. I wasn't staring, I say, even though I was. I mean, I just heard a noise and came around to check it out. She's looking at me, but the whole mask thing is freaking me out because it ain't paint. It's her skin. I try to change the subject. What happened to the mounted police, I ask. I mean, last time I was here, they kept all of the horses in the stable. She dumps the basket of balls. They're gone, close the program. Really? Why? She climbs back up on a wood horse. Mom says it costs the city too much to feed him and clean up after him. She aims and takes the swing at the ball. Thwack, bang, 26. I think it was on 25, I say. She ignores me, but on the next hit, thwack, bang, she says, 26, with attitude. I watch her take a few more whacks. What are you doing, I ask. What's it look like? I'm practicing my half-seat trunk rotation. You what? She laughs. Polo, dummy. Only polo I know is them shirts some kids wear around. Like Ralph Lauren polo? She stops and looks at me like I'm stupid. If you gotta stand there, make yourself useful. Get those balls for me, will you? I don't know why, but I do it. I hustle over to where a couple of balls sit near the barn wall. Can I ask you a question? Thwack! A ball sails by, just missing my head. Bang! Hey, I shout. She stares me down hard, then points at her face. It's called vitiligo, if you gotta know, she says. It's a disease that causes the loss of skin color. So no, I'm not dressed like a clown for Halloween, and I'm not part Dalmatian, okay? I pick up the balls and walk over to where she is and dump them. I was just gonna ask you what a chuckerhead is, I say. She kind of laughs like she ain't sure if I'm lying or not. Finally, she says, a chuckerhead is anyone who loves polo. So I'll just leave it at that.
That's great. That's great. I love how we get so much sense of her character in that first little scene, you know, what kind of kid she is. It was an interesting choice to me that you chose to give her vitiligo, to have her have that condition, and which after a while, you know, Cole doesn't care about at all. It disappears once he knows her. But I wondered why you made that choice about that character.
Yeah, well, two things. One is I always talk to kids about how, especially when you're young, you judge people on your first impressions. And that's usually, you know, how people look, how they dress, how they talk, you know, if they got money or don't, you know. And I always talk about writing past that, the surface, that you can walk in the footsteps of a character and tell kind of their emotional story. Mm-hmm. And, you know, one time I was up at a polo fundraiser for this polo team in Philadelphia, and there was, it was very posh, kind of up in Bucks County, and a lot of people with money, and outdoor polo grounds with tents and champagne and the whole thing. And they had booths and stuff, and there was this one girl I noticed who had vitiligo, but I noticed, she was really like greeting a lot of people and talking and everything. And even though you could tell everyone noticed her, and I definitely noticed her because it was a pretty extreme example. And so that kind of stuck in my head. And then for whatever reason, like the next 2 days, I saw 2 other people with the same, like pretty extreme vitiligo, which is not something you can ignore. Like you want to look, but then you also don't want to look because you don't want to be rude. So it's this weird kind of push-pull thing. And I would think, and then I started looking it up and looking at young kids who had it, imagining, what it would be like to have that go into high school, those really, really hard years where, you're changing and you're a freak of nature anyways. And then you put that on top, it's like, it's just another thing. So, Ruthie really has a lot of things to do with, not only is she the first girl to go to this military academy, she's the first Black girl on this polo team, and she also has this disease where she's literally like turning white. So I thought that was a really interesting character. I hadn't seen a character like that. And I don't intellectualize these things. Like if something like that comes to my mind, I can't shake it. It kind of comes into the story. I'm not trying to, okay, the dynamics of this, it's really just from a gut level. So
that it's an interesting character, that it's an interesting characteristic to give her to, the kind of as you say, heighten that age where you're incredibly self-conscious about everything anyway. And, so as you say, the story sort of came about, Polo Cowboy came about because of your readers, because of the kids who said, well, what else? We want to know who won the race. We want to know what else happens to him. And I know you do tons of school. Well, I don't know if you can do school visits in person much lately, but
I did. I've done a lot of virtual visits this year.
Yeah, lots of virtual ones, I'm sure. And I know you've done for years. You've done those visits, and are very much in demand. You've gone to Siberia to do a school visit. I remember that one. And that wasn't virtual. That was, you really went to.
That was in person.
Yeah. How much impact does it have on your writing to talk to those kids? How much?
Well, definitely keeps it alive when you get to talk to your readers. I mean, I imagine if you write for adults, it's hard to actually encounter people who have read your books unless you're at a festival or something. But when you go to schools, you have like whole classrooms or whole schools who have read the book, and they're, kids are very upfront, and they're very immediate. And so if they attach themselves to a story and you're the person who wrote that story, they start telling you things right off the bat that, maybe they haven't told anybody before, so it becomes very personal very quickly.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of either, you should write my story.
Yeah.
And then they tell me this crazy story about their life. Or they have ideas of other things I should write about. You should write about this, you should write about that. And, so they're full of suggestions.
Yeah.
But definitely, like, the thing I like is just talking to them, seeing the point of view, how they talk, how they relate to things, how they relate to my stories. And it keeps it real for me, because these are real kids. It's not something I'm just imagining. How they talk. And so one of the ways I write my books is through that voice. almost all my books are told in first person. And I was told in that visit to Russia, I have a real knack for kind of dialects, because they don't have dialects in Russia. All dialects have been washed clean after the Soviet era. And so I started to realize, I have a keen ear for the way people talk. And so I'm kind of like an actor, like I pick up rhythms and words, and kind of, that really helps me identify a person.
Right.
So I spent a lot of time on the language of how people talk.
Right. And even in this book, it's subtle, but there's a difference between how Cole talks and how Ruth talks.
Definitely. I mean,
they have very different backgrounds.
Yeah, Cole will use was instead of were and ain't and things like that. Whereas, even though Ruthie doesn't live so far away from him, she was raised in a different way, and so I had to make sure, she has very specific language and very specific words that aren't Cole. So they're kind of opposites in different ways,
Yeah, but I like the fact that you can do that subtly, because one thing that drives me crazy in some books is when dialect gets overdone and it distracts, from the story.
Yeah.
And
one of the interesting things that I do with my books, because there's a lot of urban dialect, is I have to create kind of like a dictionary for the copy editors in terms of the rules of the language and when you use, this form versus that form and these words, so it's very specific. So they have to catch me when I don't follow my own rules.
Yeah.
Right.
But not correct things that should be done.
Right. Correct.
Yeah. And you did that even really well in the True and Nell books.
That was real, just like Southern country, way people talk, for sure.
Yeah. But you do that very well. Let's talk about the movie. People are interested in that. And as I said, you wrote Ghetto Cowboy like 10 years ago, and it sort of took a while to become this project. Can you talk a little? And you were a filmmaker yourself at one point.
Yeah, I started off as a filmmaker. So, when I write a book, I'm seeing it as a film in my head. So I think they are very adaptable because of that.
Yeah, I think so.
But I also know the difference between a film and a book, in that you can't literally adapt a book. I mean, if you literally adapted it, it would be way too long and it wouldn't be any good. So, and it was a very unusual way of getting a book turned into a movie. There's a filmmaker whose production company is literally about a mile from the stables in North Philadelphia. Wow. So he knew this world, this community. He had made a couple of really beautiful short pieces with the cowboys in them. And, he used to work for a big time Hollywood producer, and his name is Ricky Staub. And when he made a short film, the producer said, well, I think it's time you should make a feature. What do you want to do? And he whipped out my book because it kind of talked about everything he wanted to talk about within that community. And at the time, he just wanted to make an independent film, with non-actors, like the real people in it, because he did a short like that, which was all non-actors. And it was going to be that way until Idris Elba found out about it, and he wanted to come in as producer. And of course, there was a perfect part for him. So then he came on, and then, then Lee Daniels, the producer, came on, and then other producers came on, the financing grew, and all these amazing actors came. Yeah. And so it's kind of like, it is still an independent film, low budget independent film with kind of a Hollywood pedigree, but it kind of straddles that world, because there are people from the community in the film. There were definitely people from the community around the film every day. Yeah. So it was very weird to to shoot on the actual locations that inspired the locations in the book, to have people who inspired the characters there on set talking to the actors directly.
Yeah.
And then to have these actors playing these characters that I made up.
Yeah.
That was a very, very meta thing. And I quickly realized like, oh, they don't need me anymore. Like,
I was going to say, were you able to kind of let go and just?
Oh yeah. I mean, I let go once I realized that Ricky had the same goals that I had with the book, which was to shine a light on this hidden community, this misunderstood community, and kind of celebrate it. And that he wanted the community involved. And he's, spent a lot of time there, like at that point, and then he did these beautiful little pieces. At that point, it's like, yeah, go for it. And I know my job is not to interfere, but let them do it. And of course, there's going to be changes, and that's fine. Like, I immediately understood all the changes, why. And I felt at the end of the movie, it had the same result. Like, it had the same resonance, the same feeling for me. So that's, all I cared about, if it captured that world in a way that had the same message at the end.
Yeah, and it did. And I have to say, Idris Elba looks good on a horse.
Yeah, he does. Although he is allergic to horses, so
really
a little problematic, but it's okay.
That's funny. Well, this Polo Cowboy makes your third book about horses. Ghetto Cowboy, and then you wrote Grand Theft Horse, which is based on also what, really is a real story about. She's your cousin, is that right?
She's my cousin, yes.
And then Polo Cowboy. Are you a rider? Are you a horse person?
Yeah, I like to say I'm a writer, not a rider. So, I've been on horses, but I have no claim to being a horse expert or a brilliant rider or anything, but I do have people in my extended family who are horse people. My cousin Gail, who's a racehorse trainer, my niece, who's a drill team rider, and my uncle, who's kind of an urban rider in East LA, and he rode in the Rose Parade every year. So there's horse blood in me somewhere. And it's not that I had any desire to write about horses at all. It just happened that there were these great real life stories that I wanted to tell that were kind of focused around horses. So I think like horses bring in really interesting people.
Yeah.
And those dynamics are really interesting because horses are so mysterious to me. Like, I can't figure them out. They're so big and powerful, and you can look in their eyes and it's just like deep.
Yeah. I was one of those horse crazy girls, but never got to ride as much as I wanted to do. And I'm still waiting for my pony for Christmas.
And then the challenge, of course, is you have to make those horses into actual characters who have real emotion and a real relationship to the main character. So it's really interesting. There's a really interesting dynamics.
Yeah, which you do with Boo, certainly in both these books. He's as much of a character, I think, as many of the others. Well, a second ago, you mentioned, or I guess when Kelsey was was introducing you, your 2 trips to Antarctica. And I think you actually did our festival one year from Antarctica.
Yes, I did.
And I wonder if you can talk about, first of all, why you went to Antarctica, which isn't kind of just an accidental trip. It takes a lot of work to get there. And also what is likely to come out of it in terms of books.
Yeah. So it's, again, one of those, my whole career is filled with kind of accidental encounters with stories. And, my job, unlike most writers who can sit at home and create and make things up from their imagination, I write from real life. And so I have to push myself out into the world to find these stories. And I mean, I had a college dorm mate whose dream it was, he was a diver, biology student, his dream it was to dive under the ice in Antarctica. And when we were in college together, he got a chance to do that, and he went off on this grand adventure. And unfortunately, he never came back because he had a diving accident and he ended up dying down there. And so for all these years, like Antarctica had this kind of mystery thing, you know, it was at the far end of the world, it's a place you would never go. And your imagination plays tricks on you, and you just think like, you know, he went down on the ice and never came back. You know, it's kind of like this magical thing, you know, like swimming forever under the ice, and, you know, what it must be like to die achieving your dream, right? And so I stumbled across a grant from the National Science Foundation to go to Antarctica for artists and writers. And I thought, well, wait a second, I'm a writer. And so I applied, and, you know, I think because of how I write and what I write about and the kids I write for, it kind of hit a lot of unusual things for them. And so I got picked to go. And three things came out of it. One, we started this organization, kind of a collective of all the Antarctic artists and writers over the last 50 years, because everyone, you know, one or two or three people might go down a year to do as a writer or as an artist or a musician, and then they come back and do the project, but nobody's ever met anybody else or anything like that. So like, and all this amazing, you know, art and stories. And so we came together and formed that, and did a exhibition last year. And then my own projects, I did a comic book with the, you know, I spent time with different science teams down there. And one of them was a team that were looking for the Dinosaurs of Antarctica. So I did a comic about that was in conjunction with an IMAX film called Dinosaurs of Antarctica, which was supposed to come out last year. It came out a little bit in a few cities, but then got pulled because of COVID, but will be coming out in the spring. So my comic has been going directly to schools. So I did like 60 or 70 school visits in Hillsborough County this year about that project. And they all got comic books, you know, and we showed the film and everything. So it was great. And then my big book project is coming out in 23, which is called My Antarctica, it's hard to describe what it is. I just call it a book of wonder. It's about my adventures at the bottom of the world and how it affected me and kind of turned me back into that 10-year-old kid that was fascinated with explorers. You know, so that will be coming out. And then, you know, and then that project, because a couple of the teams I was with were involved with the space program down in Antarctica. And that also led to the book I'm working on now, which is kind of the Black history of the space program and how it intersected with the civil rights movement. Called We Are All Apollo, which is a giant epic nonfiction book I'm doing with John Rocco.
Wow.
So,
and now what age group is that book for?
That will be, you know, like a middle grade going into high school kind of book. Yeah, it's filled with jaw-dropping stories.
Good.
Sure.
I look forward to it. You sort of range across books for younger kids and middle grade and YA, and is that something that you think about before you're writing, or does it just grow out of the story?
It grows out of story, and it's usually driven by the age of the character. So if the character's in high school, it's a YA book, and the character's in middle grade or in elementary school. Some things, you know, obviously if it's a picture book, aimed more towards grade school. And if it's poetry, it can, but you know, I get a wide range of readers.
Yeah.
So if I do a middle grade, I'm getting kids from 4th grade to sometimes 12th grade.
Yeah, those
So
boundaries are the kind of artificial anyway. They're a way to.
So it doesn't change the way how I approach a story or how I write. Like I don't think like, oh, I need to use simpler words or whatever. I don't ever think about that. It's just, you know, the age of the character.
Yeah. So you have the dinosaur comic book is out and the dinosaur movie is done, just sort of waiting till it can get back into IMAX theaters. You're working on the Antarctica book.
So I've finished writing the Antarctica book, but we're doing the production of it right now because it's got tons of photos, and I'm also Corbin Wilkin, who did Grand Theft Horse with me, is doing illustrations on it.
Oh, he's
on my photos.
Oh wow!
And I have a graphic novel follow-up to Yummy, which I finished a few years ago, but the artist is now just getting into it. And then I have a picture book biography of sorts about the artists Christo and Jean-Claude, which is really about the question, you know, what is art? And that's a really fun, unusual book. So yeah, wide range of types of books and subjects.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. And which sort of brings me around to another thing I wanted to ask about, because I saw your posts on Facebook a few weeks ago, and we're talking to you. You've lived for a while in Temple Terrace near Tampa.
Yes.
And your wife is on the faculty at the University of South Florida, right?
Yes.
But for the last close to a year, I guess at this point, you haven't been living in Temple Terrace.
No.
In fact, you're talking to us, it's pretty much the middle of the night where you are, I think, or maybe it's almost morning. Can you talk about where you are and why you're there?
Yeah, I am in Vienna, Austria, and my wife had a Fulbright grant to come here, and she's writing about street art and how it affects communities. And there's a very unusual street art scene here, graffiti and mural art, and they have all kinds of free art walls that anyone can paint on. And not get arrested for it all over the city. And even my daughter, who is also an artist, who came here for the summer and quickly started painting on walls. So, and it got me thinking about another story, which I already figured out, you know, how to do it, but I have to wait to finish these other books before I can actually do it.
Well, I saw that you were mentioning the Christo and Jean-Claude book, and I saw your posts from Paris were the Arc de Triomphe.
Yeah.
A project, a current project, I guess.
Yeah, the last project for them, and you know, really, it was one of the first things that they thought of back in the '60s when they lived in Paris. And so it kind of bookends the careers of those amazing artists.
It's a great choice for a book about what art is, because they're artists whom a lot of people would say, is that art? You know, and it's a great way to the
conversation is part of the art, and the fact that most of these pieces take 10, 20, 30 years to pull off, overcoming amazing odds, you know, against people who, you know, hate it for reasons unknown, even though it's only temporary for 2 weeks or whatever. But that conversation is pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing to just sit there and watch people's reactions. So I, you know, for 3 days, watch how people reacted to it. And
that's great that you got time for that.
Cool. And you'd see how the weather affects it, and the light changes it, and the wind changes it.
Yeah, I got to see the installation they did in Central Park.
Yeah.
And as you say, the conversation is part of the art. I mean, we walked around eavesdropping all day long on people who loved it and hated it and couldn't figure out what it was. And, and it's fascinating. So I'm looking forward to that.
But it changes. The big thing about them for me is it changes your perception either way, because you're now looking at something that you never really looked at before, even though you may have been around it for 30 years. You never really looked at this thing until we covered it.
Yes.
And suddenly you have this reaction.
Yeah. Yep. That's great. Well, it's kind of what you do in your books. You pick out things that people haven't looked at or they've looked at and walked by. I mean, I wonder how many people in Philadelphia didn't know anything about those Cowboys.
Yeah, I mean, most people I knew in Philadelphia had never heard of the Black Urban Cowboys, even if they lived a couple of miles away, because, the perception was it was the most dangerous neighborhood in the city, and why would I even go there? And so therefore they couldn't possibly know there was this amazing, wonderful community that was there.
So you're
sometimes, a lot of my books are just about shining a light on something that not only do they not know, but I didn't know before I started a particular project, because most of my books are about things I never knew about until I stumbled across them. And then I was like, oh, I got to write about this.
Yes. Well, I've always, from the first time I talked to you years ago, I've been really impressed by the amount of research you do, that you do so much. And I know people who write nonfiction books for adults who don't do as much research as you do.
Well, yeah, this current space book, it will be the king of the research. It's pretty amazing and deep.
It sounds like, but I think that's one thing that makes your books appeal so widely, to kids. And I think they're probably books that adults read with their kids too.
Yeah, definitely. I get a lot of adult readers, and for me, part of the research is just those details that you couldn't possibly know or even make up. Those are the things that make it real. And even if you've never been to a place, you feel that that's real. It's not just like this vague thing. You're talking specific, with the smells and the sounds and the looks and the way people dress and certain words people use. And it really paints a vivid picture, like, oh, I've never been here, but I feel like I'm there.
What really did that for me in Polo Cowboy was later in the book, as Cole and Ruthie become friends, she comes to his neighborhood and she starts teaching the younger kids there to play polo. And they don't have enough horses for everybody to ride a horse. And they play polo on foot and on bicycles, and some of them are on horseback, and they make up the rules and they make up these these crazy costumes that they wear. And I love that scene, it felt really real to me. It felt like that's what kids would do. That's what those kids would do.
Yeah, I remember, playing our form of baseball in the house, with Nerf balls and padded rackets or whatever and bats. And, and you make up the rules, you change it, you're playing in street ball or whatever. And, but in your mind, you're playing in Dodger Stadium or, so. That was definitely easy thing to imagine.
But you brought in the polo details that really, and also the details about the kids themselves that sort of really made that work. So, and
it is an odd sport, so you have to figure out a way to explain it without getting too deep in the weeds, because
it's very. Oh, I don't even know the word for it. It's complicated.
Complicated, yes.
I've watched it a few times, and I really don't understand it all. I just like watching the horses.
It's pretty exciting, but
Uh-huh. And I was going
hard
to say,
to.
I really like, I've read a number of your books and reviewed them. And when I've read them, I don't feel, oh, I'm reading a children's book.
Right. Yeah.
There's a little bit of difference maybe in vocabulary and some things, that might be left out that would be in an adult novel, but not much. And I never have that. There's some children's books that I've read where I feel, oh, I'm really reading a children's book.
Yeah.
And don't do that,
I mean, I definitely don't talk down
Right.
to them or try to like alter my language. I write it the same way I would write an adult story.
Mm-hmm.
There's no difference to me. So like any age should be able to read it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when I read the True and Nell books, Truman Capote and Harper Lee are writers I've been interested in for decades. And I've read books about both of them and I've read their books. Mm-hmm. But when I read your books about them as children, I felt that I was learning something and seeing something about them that I hadn't seen before. So,
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing. It's like, that's a book when I found out about their childhood, mm-hmm. I really wanted to read, but nobody had written that book. Mm-hmm. And to me, it was like
each other, but yeah,
I guess I have to write it.
Well, you did a good job. So I can't do the math in my head. I'm just thinking, but you basically have 20 books coming out in the next 3 years.
20 books, yes. Something like that.
All right, send me a schedule, but
okay.
Shall we see if there are any questions from people watching?
You can check.
Kelsey, do we have any questions?
Or Kelsey might have a question.
We'll let the audience kind of get their thoughts together, and if anyone has a question, please feel free to pop it in the chat. That would be great. I'll start it off. It's always good to get the ball rolling. When you're writing, Greg, do you draw inspiration from any other authors? Are you reading while you're writing, or are you more of a kind of just turn it off sort of thing?
It's interesting because I can't really read fiction when I'm writing. Mm-hmm. And if I'm writing all the time, that means I can't read fiction. And so what I end up reading a lot of is nonfiction and or graphic novels. Mm-hmm. Since I have such fascination with real life, it kind of fits into that. Which means though, I have a lot of author friends whose books I can't read. I mean, part of it has to do with if you read a really great fiction writer, you subconsciously, at least when I was younger, would subconsciously steal certain, rhythms and styles. And I found that, if I didn't read them, my voice was much more pure and much more me. So I just kind of stick to that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I wish I could.
Well, when you are reading, or let's go with this. Do you have some recommendations for let's say we're always looking for great recommendations, especially for the middle grade age group around here, for like more recommendations for those graphic novels and books and stuff like that really excite you for that age group, or especially nonfiction. I think kids seek out a lot more. We've noticed that kids are seeking out nonfiction a lot.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have a Goodreads page, which I post every good book that I've read on it. So you can go through that and see all my recommendations. But, off the top of my head, I think about Candace Fleming's book about Lindbergh, which I thought was pretty great. And then, I read a lot of, I'm in Europe right now, so there's a lot of great European graphic novels that aren't available in English in America. So that's always interesting to see, like, a whole other culture's take on something. I mean, I'm reading, well, for my space book, this book, We Could Not Fail, which is, definitely related to the story I'm doing now, is a great book about the hidden figures of the space program. And then, I'm kind of blanking because I do go through a lot, and then they just pile up.
Yeah. I can relate to that.
Yeah.
The book's just piling up. Yeah, Colette can too. Definitely. I think people are being a little bit shy in the chat, but if you don't mind, I will continue with my questions. Or Colette, if you have another one, please feel free to jump in too. I don't want to cut you off as well, but I don't know what, I guess I always am curious about what sort of drives an author to choose like the age range for where they're going to write, like adult versus middle grade versus YA versus, making this fiction versus nonfiction, sort of your thought process behind that.
Yeah, I mean, for some reason, my brain is stuck kind of around age 13. So a lot of my characters are kind of around that age. I don't know why. I don't have any like big thing that happened to me at that age that, grounded me there. But I did find when I started doing school visits even before I was a writer, when I was a filmmaker. And I found it very easy to talk to middle grade kids because, it's that perfect age, because in high school, they're a little bit too cool. They don't put out as much. Grade school, they're just like, so middle school is like, you can have really good conversations with people. And, I just found it very easy to talk to them. So stories kind of came out of that experience. And, I found I could write that way easily, and partially because, my language is very stripped down. I don't use a lot of highfalutin words or flowery language. It's very like, which is very appropriate for writing for that age. And then, I do bounce back and forth between fiction and nonfiction. Sometimes I want to tell the exact story, and then it's nonfiction. Sometimes I'm inspired by a place and there's so much going on, I have to come up with a fiction story just to figure out how to come at it. So, I mean, I could have written a nonfiction book about True and Nell, but what I really loved about them was their sense of adventure and how they pretended to be Sherlock Holmes and Watson and go off on these detective stories. I thought, wouldn't it be cool to tell their story as a detective story? And that was too juicy not to do. And, so you make choices like that. Ghetto Cowboy was kind of like, you hear about all hundreds of really interesting, amazing incidents, and you think, well, how can I fit all those stories into one piece? Well, if you saw it through one character's eyes, and then it becomes like, you start to put this puzzle together around a character. But you're essentially saying, everything that happens in the book happened in some way or another in real life, but it's been fictionalized and put into a certain context to kind of hopefully capture the spirit of a place or a person. So those are the kinds of things. And then sometimes, whether it's a novel or graphic novel or picture book, kind of comes naturally. I feel like the book knows what it wants to be, and my job is just to listen to it. And sometimes I think, oh, it's going to be this, but the book wants to be this thing over here. And so after a while of trying this, I realized that's not right. It's like, it wants to be this. Like Grand Theft Horse would have been, the super easy choice would have been to write it as one of these inspirational true life stories that you see There's like a whole section in Barnes and Noble about people and an animal, like real life inspirational story. Like that's a whole section.
Mhm.
But to me, my cousin was kind of like this superhero. And I thought, well, how do you tell a superhero story? You put them in a comic. So that was kind of the thinking, even though it wasn't the logical or, easy choice to do. It's just seemed like the right choice.
Yeah, I like that. I like what you said about the story sort of knowing what it wants to be, and you just kind of
Yeah.
have to be the conduit for it, I guess. And like it just flows through you, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I totally agree with you about middle school. I not taught, but worked with middle school in a previous job, and I always was so surprised at how astute, like, kids their age can be sometimes, and just how free they are, still feeling like they can talk about, they can just say things, and it's very astute most times. So it's a really great age. What about you? Well, Colette, I wonder that about you too with your writing as well. When you picked up and wrote, especially when you wrote for Tampa Bay Noir, was that the kind of the story you always thought you were going to tell, or that format, that genre, I guess?
I do love that genre. I hadn't really thought of writing in that genre because I'm a journalist, and I had not written fiction since college. But when I was asked to edit Tampa Bay Noir, Greg remembers this because I asked him to do a story, and he was busy writing 20 other books, so he couldn't do it. So I had to write a story instead of you, Greg.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, and actually it's very good because I wrote the story, and I hadn't written fiction since college, but I had this story in my head, and I thought it would work as a noir story, and it was a Tampa story. So I wrote it, and I sent it to my publisher, and I said, if you like it, use it. If you don't, it won't hurt my feelings if you leave it out. But he liked it, and he put it in the book. And he didn't tell me this, he entered it with the Mystery Writers of America for their Robert Fishman Award, which is for the best first published short story. And I won.
Yeah.
And I was.
So I can take some responsibility in that.
But he didn't. Yeah, I credit you for telling me no. But I didn't even know it was entered, and the first I heard was people on social media saying, "Congratulations, you won an Edgar." And it's not really an Edgar, but and I'm like, "Is this April Fool's Day?" I don't know. But I really did win it, and it's kind of amazing. And so I wrote this first fiction story, and it's kind of funny to win something for first published story when you've been making a living as a writer for 35 years. But I did. And I can't decide whether I should write more fiction or quit while I'm ahead.
That's hilarious. I didn't realize that the first you had heard about it, Colette, was all over social media. That's hilarious. That's so good. Yeah, really good.
I will say the exception to the fiction rules recently, I started reading Elmore Leonard and John Le Carre. So that was kind of like, so it feels different in that it's really a genre piece. So I feel like it's an exception to the rule.
They're like the two of the masters of what they're so good.
Yeah. Well, along those lines, I'm going to follow up with a last question. I like to ask this of everyone. If you were going to curate your staff pick shelf at Tombolo Books, what are the must-haves on your staff pick shelf? I'll let both of you give us a couple of examples. What do you have to have on your staff pick shelf?
Of new books?
Any book, it doesn't matter. We'll order it into the store and we're putting it on your staff pick shelf.
Well, I always say, because I talk to kids, they always ask me what kind of I was into when I was their age. And this is an old classic, but, The Phantom Toll Booth was big for me because it was really kind of this crazy book that felt like it broke all the rules, so it was kind of like that moment, like, oh, I didn't know you could do that in a book. So I always approach my books that same way. I'm always trying to surprise the readers and do something different. So they would probably think like, oh, I didn't know you could do that in a book. So that's always on my list. And then like a really old classic, The Juggler of Our Lady by R.O. Bleckman, which is a great, great classic kind of fairy tale that inspired the short film I did called Picasso on the Beach that I did many, many, many years ago. And it kind of inspires how I approach a story, just like the power of simplicity in storytelling, like just really boiling it down to its essence. So those are kind of two bookends I think about. Maybe Colette probably has some newer books.
Yeah, I was going to say mine would change like every month.
Yeah.
You know, maybe more often. From the last couple of years, I would say if I picked two, I would say Hamnet and Harlem Shuffle. And for a classic, to circle back around to what Kelsey mentioned at the beginning, Raymond Chandler's The Long Goodbye.
Those are some solid staff shelves. I'm putting ours to shame over here. Just kidding. No, that's wonderful. Thank you both so much for popping in with us and having this conversation. If you haven't gotten your copy of Polo Cowboy yet, we have some here at Tombolo Books. We ship anywhere UPS and USPS ship in the country, so we can get this to you wherever you are. And Greg, it was such an honor to have you here tonight to launch this book with us. And Colette, it's always a pleasure to have you in conversation. We appreciate both of you as local authors supporting Tombolo. And just thank you both for being here this evening.
Well, next time it'll be in person.
Yes.
Yeah.
Next time we'll all be in the same room. It'll be great.
Yeah.
It's great to see you, Greg.
Right.
Thanks a lot.
Great. Thank you, Colette.
Thanks.